I remember reading years ago, Eugene Peterson wrote, pastoral ministry reinforces inattentiveness to God. When I first went into pastoral ministry, I thought, well, it'd probably be some things that don't happen. I won't make as much money as other people and all this other stuff, but at least I will get spiritual maturity thrown in because I study the Bible all the time and get paid for it. And of course, once you begin to do that, you realize, to what extent am I loving my church? And to what extent am I using the church to help me be more successful is a mixture that I'm not able to fully discern even in my own heart or life.
Well, John, thanks for making time to be with us today.
It's a privilege, and I love the work that you're doing, so thank you for letting me come on.
I've been one of many people who have benefited deeply from your work, and your voice to me is really unique, that it blends theology and psychology. But what for me as a pastor is really, I found helpful is that you write and speak as one who's a disciple yourself, but also has given your life to the pastoral work. And I just wanted to begin and hear a little bit about your journey in the pastoral vocation, how you found yourself in that role. It could be safer just to be a writer, just a preacher, but you've said yes many times in your life to the office of pastoral work. And I'd just love to hear a bit about that part of your story.
That kind of question, it's a little bit like when you're a couple, the how did you meet story.
Yeah, exactly.
Folks who are in pastoral ministry, that question of calling, what was the origin story, how did you go into it, I think has a lot to say about each of us. So it's probably worth everybody who's listening to us just dwelling on that for themselves. For me, it was a roundabout way. I actually spent more time studying psychology than I did theology. I thought I would probably become a clinical psychologist and then started doing therapy with people, and they got less healthy the more that I saw them, which is not a good thing. And I found for myself, I would feel kind of anxious about those sessions. Like I felt the burden of making them interesting or helpful, and that felt kind of draining to me. And so it was not a life-giving thing. And I believe in therapy deeply, and experience it and need it myself, but did not feel like it was a life-giving thing to do. And at the same time, I started working part-time at a church, and there would be moments when I would be preaching in particular, and I would just feel so alive. Like every cell in my body is just trying to listen to God and my own spirit and what's happening in the room and how do I respond, and deep sense of engagement and love for that. The hardest part for me was I never got the call. So I grew up in the Midwest in the U.S. in a Baptist tradition where if you were going to become a pastor, you're supposed to get a call, which meant a certain kind of subjective experience.
Yeah.
Where you get a thought or a word or a voice or something that says you can't do anything else, you must do this. And in the kind of tradition that said, don't be a pastor if you could do anything else, which would be a pretty low bar for people going into pastoral ministry. So when I was finishing with grad studies, it was very confusing to me because I would pray, got very frustrated and said, God, I don't care what it is. I just want to know, what do you want me to do? And I'll do it. And that never came. And so I had to choose. And a guy named Dallas Willard became very helpful to me. Later on, he's got a little book called Hearing God. And part of what he talks about is how God's main goal for your life is the person you become. And that means that very often, just like parents with kids, if I always told my kids, wear these clothes, eat this food, go to this school, marry this person, take this job, they would never develop the kind of judgment and character that they need to become a really excellent person. So if I'm a wise parent, often my will for my child has to be you choose. And that means that very often with God, since God's in the character formation business, and since decision-making is an indispensable part of character formation, very often his will for us will be, I want you to choose. And I did not have that theological understanding of guidance or God's will for my life or pastoral ministry. So for me, it was much more of a difficult decision-making process where I had to try to get counsel and think deeply and ask people questions. In retrospect, I think I grew a lot more having to do that than I would have if I'd have just gotten a postcard from heaven. And honestly, I don't think that I was as interested in God's guidance as much as I just wanted to avoid the anxiety that goes with a difficult decision.
Yeah.
So it was a learning journey for me, both in terms of deciding what I would do with my life vocationally, and also how do I get to know God better and what kind of person is God and what's the nature of God's guidance. So that's what I did. In a strange way, I don't know if I've talked about this much, as opposed probably to some people who had that sense of call, I didn't necessarily identify with being a pastor as I went into that in a sense of identity. And in a little bit of an odd way, I think for me, that valuing that identity to the extent that it's an identity, and that work and the gift of being able to be involved in it, it has actually grown in me over those years. So I'm not actually at a local church now. I'm still quite involved in quote unquote ministry activities, but not in a local church. We're members of a local church, but I probably feel a keen sense of pastoring.
Yeah.
And what a gift it is to be able to be a pastor now, more than I ever have.
I'm so interested in this statement you made that, Willard emphasized and others have, that, God's very interested in who we're becoming.
Yeah.
And I think that frame shapes the way we as pastors preach and serve others, the programs we make and how we organize the affairs of the church and the programs and all those things. But I've been thinking a lot recently about how somehow God has decided the way that He will make me a certain kind of person is through pastoring. That actually the very work of pastoring, in my case, in the case of many people listening and yours, pastoring is a part of our life. It's not our whole identity. It's not our whole life. But that's changed the way I experience certain circumstances, particularly the hardest parts and maybe the most beautiful parts of pastoring.
Yeah.
This curious wondering, oh, okay, Lord, this thing is not just an obstacle in my way. This might be one of the very things that you are kindly allowing into my life to make me a certain kind of person. And I just would love to hear your reflections on the formation of the disciple, the follower of Jesus, through the act of pastoring. That the very thing that we're doing that's meant to help other people become more like Christ is one of the forums through which God is forming us.
Yeah. One of the things that Dallas used to say, and for folks who are listening to us, you may well know, but if you don't, Dallas Willard was a philosopher for many years at University of Southern California, and just a unique person, really brilliant mind, but more than anything, lived into the reality of the kingdom in a way that I had just not experienced being around somebody before. So he's been very helpful to lots of us in moving to a clearer understanding of who Jesus is and what Jesus's message was and what life in the kingdom looks like. So it's hard for me to talk about anything without talking about Dallas, because I just have lived in those thoughts and teachings so much. Dallas would sometimes say about pastors in particular, we rarely remember what people said, but you never forget the kind of person people were. So if you think about, if you grew up in the church or around churches, people who were pastors there, when you think about that person, you might not be able to remember a whole lot of sermons, but you will. It's kind of like we recognize faces.
Yeah.
And in fact, Dallas had a lot to say about faces and the face of Jesus, and the face is where we manifest the kind of person that we are. And so in the Bible, face is about something more than just the physical front part of your head. Um, uh, so the most important thing that we bring, that I bring, that any of us bring to pastoral ministry in particular, is the kind of person that I am. That matters way more than the particular things I say. And in fact, the kind of person that I am will inevitably leak out of the kind of things that I say.
For better or for worse.
When Jesus says, the old King James translation of Matthew is, your idle words will condemn you. I used to think that meant, don't be involved in idle, useless talk. Only say things that really count. No. That's not the point. The point is, it's the things that we say when we're not trying to look good that reveal the true nature of our personhood. And so when I'm preaching, to some extent, when I'm having a conversation like this with you, I can be aware of what's happening. And even if I don't want to, I will tend to censor and monitor and image manage and present. But we can only do that a certain amount. Kind of like if your picture's being taken, you can hold your stomach in for a while, but you can't do that 24/7.
Right.
And,
Eventually, it all hangs out.
Yep. And so I do think that the pastorate is a wonderful crucible for character formation. And in 1,000 ways, I learn when I hear somebody else that I know is pastoring a church and it's bigger than mine and it's growing more than mine is. And I feel that sense of inadequacy or comparison or envy. Okay, well, that's just where I am right now. When somebody criticizes me and I find myself just not liking them, then I find out, oh, okay, well, that's kind of where I am right now. When I preach a sermon, if it goes well, I want to hang around the building afterwards, to the last person goes home. Hey, how you doing? What'd you think? Pretty amazing day, wasn't it? And if it goes badly, I just want to get out and dodge so fast. And so in 1,000 ways, if I'm open to it, I can learn in the pastorate. Yep, this is who I am. This is the truth about who I am. This is the truth about who I am. And then look to find ways to arrange my life or to train or to engage in practices or whatever language will not make you throw up in your mouth a little bit around receiving power and presence from God to become a different kind of person.
You use this language, I think Dallas Willard uses it all as well, the with God life. And I've been meditating on that a lot, particularly as I'm having conversations with my son Hudson, who's 12. And he's thinking a lot about what it means to be a Christian. And he's asking really good questions. Like, so one question that has been so fascinating, it's a great discipleship question. He's like, so what do I do now? Like, he's like, if I'm in, and he's a really discerning guy. He's like, I think I'm in.
Yep.
What do I do now? And I was like, as a pastor, I'm so appropriately confronted with that question because it should be the most obvious thing. Well, like, this is what we do. We help people build a life with God.
Yep.
And with him, and then hopefully with my congregation as well, I'm trying to invite him into a way of being in the world that is increasingly aware that we're in God's world and we're with God. And I've really had that shaped by Dallas's work and your work and others, this idea of a with God life, that it actually is an experienced reality that shapes every part of our being. And I just wanted to invite you to help me reflect a little bit on inviting people not just into a get out of jail free card for eternity, not just like we don't have, even in this life, like something that's a good addition or a good component, even if it's central, but an entire way of being in the world.
Yeah.
And I think this is why Dallas's writing is so compelling, because you find yourself reading it going, this is consistent with the theology that I've learned, but there is a way of talking about it that's more real and tangible and like incredibly inviting.
Yeah.
that feels so fresh. And I'm just on the journey of like, I'm trying to discover a way of not just preaching, but walking with people that's inviting them into that fullness of the with God life. And so I thought maybe we could just talk about that for a little bit. And maybe there's other ways that you would describe it, but this idea of how do we invite people into a whole other way of being in the world with God?
Mm-hmm. That is so wonderful and deep and vast.
Yes, I realize that it's a pretty big space, but I
Thank
have
you
I
for,
have you, and so I wanted to go there.
I don't think it's possible to talk about that enough or too much, because it is so central. Many, many years ago, there was a group of theologians, scholars that got together to produce, there's a million kind of study Bibles, and one of them is called the Spiritual Formation Bible. And so very bright minds. And one of the questions they were dealing with is, what is it that unifies the Bible? When you think about the real different kinds of books and narrative and poetry and prophecy and the Gospels and letters and across many centuries and different languages, and like what ties them all together? And so different people threw out different ideas. And then Dallas said, the unity of the Bible is found in the offer of the with God life, centered in the person and message of Jesus of Nazareth. And, drop the mic. It's like everybody in the room. Yep. So that notion from the beginning in Genesis, life together with God, God comes to the garden to be his friend, to be empowered by him, each moment to be aware of his goodness, that every good and perfect gift comes from God. And so our opportunities for gratitude are simply literally infinite, to being delivered from fear. Everything really does flow out of that the basic offer of Scripture, its central message is that I can live with God. And no one has ever described it or modeled it or made it available in the way that Jesus did. That is the gospel. When Jesus comes, Mark 1:14, and in many, many other places, the time has come. The kingdom of God is at hand. It's now available. Repent and believe the good news of life together with God in his kingdom. And so I think for many of us, I'll just speak for myself. I grew up in a church that I'm really grateful for, but I kind of understood the gospel to be the offer of getting into heaven when you die, and clarity around the minimal entrance requirements for that. So you've got that job done. But then you're kind of left with the problem of discipleship. Do I have to be a disciple in order to get into heaven? Can I get into heaven without being a disciple? Well, that becomes a difficult question for pastors to answer. And you kind of don't want to say yes, because that makes it sound like it's works righteousness, but you kind of don't want to say no, because then it's like, optional equipment, rather than saying, no, the gospel is about life with God right here, right now. And of course, that includes forgiveness as a gift of grace, and that includes life together with God forever afterwards. But it begins right here, right now. Yeah. And if I don't want it right here, right now, I'm probably not going to want it eternally. So there's just a host of thoughts and words that we have to grapple with in a little different way to get clarity on stuff. And then I think, as you're talking about how do you discuss this with your son, part of what's needed is clarity around the vision, so that Dallas would often talk about transformation involving VIM, vision, intention, method. And so whether you want to lose weight, learn Spanish, play golf, play the piano, whatever, I have to have a vision. The test of an adequate vision is it elicits unforced desire. To what shall I compare the kingdom of God? It's like a man that found a treasure in a field, pearl of great price. Jesus would use money because we all want money. It's like, yeah, I'd like that. So vision and then intention. I've decided to follow Jesus, decided to become a disciple. And then what's the method? What's the program? How do I pursue that? And so what's your son's name?
His Hudson.
helping him gain a vision of how good God is and what kind of person would I be if I really followed God.
Hmm.
Uh, Almost always we have a vision problem,
Hmm.
and we think of God as less good than he actually is. So it's hard to really trust that obeying him is the good life. And so Jesus is constantly trying to clarify the vision. You have heard that it was said, but I say to you, here's what it would be like to live without anger or without lust or without deceit. And Nancy and I were on a long car ride yesterday, and I had this weird thought with other cars on the road of just imagining what would it be like to authentically be filled with goodwill towards everybody on the road,
Hmm.
where I wasn't angry or wasn't in a hurry or not even neutral or judgmental. Well, they're an expensive car. That guy's probably really materialistic. That car's really cheap and poor. That guy's probably really low fun. What would it be like to just authentically be filled with goodwill? Gosh, here's Jason. I want you to do really well.
Hmm.
And just having that thought, then that kind of leads to, well, I could pretend that way for a minute and ask God to help me be a little bit more that way.
Hmm.
And then in that moment, that thought is the with God life.
Hmm.
So in one sense, Dallas would often say this too, if somebody wants to be a disciple and they want to know, what do I do next? The answer is just do the next right thing you ought to do.
Hmm.
And then you'll discover you can't do it. And then you'll ask, well, okay, God, what do I need to do? How do I need to rearrange my life to get the power to do that stuff?
Hmm.
So in one sense, it's as simple as just do the next right thing, because that's what a surrendered will does.
Hmm.
But I do think there's another piece to it, and that is, we were talking privately a little earlier about the 12 steps, and that's such an interesting program that I've been learning a lot about discipleship from. And part of the way that they talk about 12-step community is that it's a fellowship and it's a program.
Hmm.
And it struck me when I started to think about that, those are always the two essential components. So initially, it starts with Abraham and then Israel. That's the fellowship, and Torah is the program.
Hmm.
And then Jesus comes along, and he and his disciples are the fellowship. Sermon on the Mount, his teaching is the program.
Hmm.
And then after the resurrection, Acts chapter 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and prayer, to the breaking of bread, fellowship day after day. That's the fellowship. That's the program. Always there's a fellowship and a program. And a program is a way of life that is actionable, it's distinct, it's transformational, but it's not legalistic and it's not random.
Hmm.
And so one of the challenges in the church is we need a program like that. We need a program of discipleship. And we need to see it in a fellowship, in a community. So I'm not just trying to do it on my own. I'll need to adjust it and tailor it to myself and my own sins and wiring and needs. But I need to be part of a community who are following a program together, so that just like in AA, people know if they're doing the program or not. They are quite aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need that in the church. But over the centuries, clarity around the program constantly gets lost, or it gets separated from the vision, and then it becomes legalistic and
Yeah.
trivialized and non-transformational. And so for folks who are pastors, I think that question of just starting with me, what's my program of discipleship, or whatever language you want, steps, and then for our church, what's our program?
Yeah.
And how do we help people get clarity around it? That is a huge need in our day.
Yeah. There's something about, I would say, the evangelical Protestant stream of the church that I grew up in and that I'm very grateful for. That I think if the movement was honest with itself, it's like we have a bit of a program. Sundays is part of the program. Some sort of activity with scripture is part of the program. Certain practices like giving. But there's a real caution about expanding the program out past that. There's kind of a sense of like, and then in some cases, certain things are very heavily over-indexed on. The Reformed tradition, the program's built out around understanding theology and a certain right belief. And then other traditions like, I'm so grateful for, in my teen years, charismatic worship as this place I could have my emotions mingle with God and others. And it really engaged parts of my being that wasn't engaged in the teaching, but in my expression. So like the program gets built out, but there's almost this point of like real caution. And some of it, like you said, is like, well, we don't want legalism. We don't want to distill down the with God life to a series of activities.
Yep.
But I do feel like, especially now, what we're seeing here in Vancouver in our church is a lot of people coming to know faith, coming to know Jesus, that don't have any preconceived scaffolding of what life with God looks like. And this has been actually really refreshing, because what we are not experiencing is baggage around these things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this actually really sincere sort of set of questions like, what do I do next?
Yeah.
How do I pray? You mentioned fasting. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And that has been so subtly radical for me to think like, oh, I get to invite people to think about how to organize their life in such a way that increasingly more they're saying yes to the next right thing. They're increasingly more aware of the presence of God. But what is that hesitation? It is legalism. There is appropriate concerns, but there's a hesitation to be prescriptive, I think there's a sense that everyone's life is so different and we don't want to put too high a bar. But I also sense on the flip side, we're almost leaving people without a roadmap or a path or steps.
Yeah.
Maybe help articulate that tension, and how do we move through that tension to be of service to people, to build a pattern, a program of life that doesn't get hijacked into legalism or empty spirituality.
Yeah. So in the course of studying 12-step communities, one of the people that I talked to has taught in those communities for decades. And he wouldn't call himself a Christian, but he thinks a lot about transformation, and he talks about the 12 steps as a wisdom tradition. He said the problem with most wisdom traditions, and I would put churches in here, is that they have a wimpy step one.
Say more.
Step one in AA is admitted we were powerless over. Now there is alcohol. That's the only time alcohol is mentioned in the 12 steps, but you can fill in the blank with whatever you want to. Pride, anxiety, lust, pleasure, status, approval, powerless over this, and our lives have become unmanageable. And one of the paradoxical discoveries of the 12 steps is the more deeply you feel the pain and hopelessness of that powerlessness and unmanageability, the better positioned you are to find God or have God find you. And part of that is because, for Bill W. and then Dr. Bob and everybody listening to us will either be or know folks with deeply painful addictions in their lives. When you hit bottom, when the pain is deep enough, you will do anything. Not because you're supposed to, not because somebody tells you to, but because it's life or death, heaven or hell, this is it.
Yeah.
And the possibility of deliverance into another way of life is so blindingly good that if you begin to pursue it, nothing about you feels heroic or proud of it. There's no elder brother syndrome there. It's just, I can't believe it. I can't believe now that hope is possible. And this guy said, problem is most churches have a wimpy step one. And if you have a wimpy step one, you will have a wimpy steps 2 through 12. Or however many steps you have in your program. We all have a program. Program is just what's the way of life that I'm pursuing. So lots of language, discipleship pathway, rule of life from some communities. It's all referring to the same things. How do I arrange my time, my money, my work, my relationships, my prayer if I pray, my serving, my volunteering? It's just we all got a life. We got to arrange it around something. Psalm 1. There's a good way to do it and a dumb way to do it. And wise people have always understood that. And it was really striking to me, Jason, when this guy told me that. And I thought about churches where I've served, people in my life. I thought about how in the Bible, very often with Jesus, you'll see these stories that feature two people, and one of them has a very robust step one and one a real wimpy step one. So the prodigal son, miserable, eating at a pig trough, got nothing. He got a real strong step one. He came to himself, Jesus says. The elder brother, been serving my father, been doing good. I've been towing the line, walking the straight and narrow. He got a very wimpy step one. He did not feel very desperate. The Pharisee and the tax collector in the synagogue, and the Pharisee's self-understanding is, I fast twice a week. I give a tithe on everything. Thank God I'm not like other. I'm really doing quite well. And the tax collector won't even look to heaven. I'm just a train wreck. Simon the Pharisee, who doesn't have Jesus' feet washed or greet him with a kiss, and then the sinful woman that can't stop crying, wiping his feet with his. She has a very strong step one. People who have a real strong step one run to Jesus, and people with kind of a wimpy step one, I think I'm doing okay. I think God would be pretty pleased with me. It's hard to generate intensity or urgency around the program. And this is a real problem for pastors because we can't deliver pain to people. We could do lots of stuff, but we can't do that. And but it was very striking when I began to think about that. When we think of method, the program, it's kind of not rocket science. So, what the 12 steps do, it's what churches do. Surrender to God, fearless and searching moral inventory. I must do self-examination, confession, admit it to God ourselves and one other person, the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, they tend to do it with a little more intensity, a little more vigor in most 12 steps community than we do in churches, ironically.
And more honesty.
And way more honesty. Yeah. And that's part of why more power flows there.
Yeah.
Initially with the 12 steps, with Bill W., Dr. Bob, the first group of people, they all just got into what was called the Oxford group, which was an attempt to recapture intense discipleship in the modern world. And for the first 4 years, there were no 12 steps. There was no AA. There was no big book. There was just Bill W. and then Dr. Bob, and then eventually 100 people getting into Oxford groups and admitting and coming to believe there was a higher power that could restore them and turning their will and their lives over and doing a fearless and searching moral and admitting with raw honesty. And they discovered when they followed discipleship to Jesus as a byproduct, they got sobriety thrown in. And when you ask the question, in the average church, if a severely addicted person walked in the door and said, okay, how do I arrange my life in this church? What are you telling me to do? And we told them, here's what we usually do. Come to church on Sunday, get in a small group, whatever it is. Would they be delivered from their addiction? And of course, for the most part, not at all. But it actually happened as a matter of empirical fact and history. And I think part of what's lacking might be called a theory of change.
Yeah.
AA has a theory of change. Now, they didn't invent it, they discovered it out of pain.
Yeah.
Through discipleship to Jesus. And Moses had a theory of change. Jesus had a theory of change. The Acts 2 church had a theory of change. It was a gift from God. John Wesley, but very often it will begin with people who are in a lot of pain. So we'll find in prisons, people who are prisoners. I was in Angola prison a couple months ago, people in there for life. If somebody decides that they're going to follow the way of Jesus, they tend to do it with a level of intensity and urgency and clarity. I gotta have this. I know what the alternative is, so that these practices become transformational for them. Very often where the church is persecuted, we will find the program becomes transformational. Very often, if somebody has a terminal diagnosis, or people that are going through great pain, loss, maybe divorce, then the way of following Jesus becomes transformational. But it really is because step one has gotten real deep for them, real strong. And so I think in the church, the need for clarity around what is our way, what's our theory of change. Doesn't have to be perfect. The good news is God's at work. So
Yeah.
there's a great tractor beam called the Holy Spirit. If you just get towards that path, God's going to do God's part. But then to let people know there is the possibility of this wonderful life, and the alternative to it is a horrible fate. And the way of Jesus is the only way.
I want to shift gears a little bit. We talked earlier about the life of a pastor being one of the ways that God makes us like him, and we can become more beautiful people. It also can have the opposite effect. There can be, like, the image I have in my mind is like a big boat that's collecting barnacles, and it's just collecting. And if you think about a pastor's life, like, we're proximate to so much sin, so much death, so much disappointment, just by nature of the kind of work we do. And there's other parts of it that can be malforming, something about teaching the very thing which is precious to you, and that duality, all these things. And I'm sitting across from you right now, and I experience you as somebody who still has joy, still loves the Lord, lights up when you talk about life with him, still has a sense of optimism with the church. And I know that you've seen the worst sides of it. I just wonder what advice or invitations you might give to pastors who are wanting to go the distance in this vocation, and aware of the fact that the trajectory might not be towards being more optimistic, but maybe more pessimistic, maybe not more curious, but more cynical. Like, these things sneak in, and I get it. Like, I get why it happens. I feel it. It almost feels like there's this pull in it all to become less hopeful, less curious, less full of wonder and joy. And maybe as you reflect on your journey, what's allowed you to shed the barnacles and stay tender and hope-filled in the midst of it all?
Well, it's very kind of you to say. Of course, my first thought is, I have barnacles you know not of. So I hope that that's true. I hope that that's true. Only God fully knows, for me or for anybody. I definitely think that it's true that it's just the nature of a fallen world. Everybody's life, everybody's situation sets themselves up for certain problems or challenges in following Jesus. And that's true for those of us that go into pastoral ministry. I remember reading years ago, Eugene Peterson wrote, "Pastoral ministry reinforces inattentiveness to God."
Whoa.
And that was a surprising statement to me. When I first went into pastoral ministry, I thought, well, it'd probably be some things that don't happen. I won't make as much money as other people and all this other stuff, but at least I will get spiritual maturity thrown in, because I study the Bible all the time and get paid for it. And of course, once you begin to do that, you realize it becomes very easy to read the Bible looking for something useful in my job that can make me more successful. And so that dividing line between when am I seeking to know God better and help other people spiritually, to what extent am I loving my church, and to what extent am I using the church to help me be more successful, is a mixture that I'm not able to fully discern even in my own heart or life. So I think there are deep challenges on that front. I think there's an old saying from the Desert Fathers, if you want to keep the fire warm, do not open the oven door too often. And there's something about talking about God and faith where there's a certain danger to saying the same things too many times. And on the one hand, to tell my story honestly, to share faith, can make it grow, see what God does in somebody else's life. On the other hand, especially when it becomes kind of rehearsed, or to the extent that there's a bigger gap between who I actually am and the image that I'm presenting, the repetition of that makes the fire get a little colder, and they become just words. So many, many years ago, I went to spend a day with Dallas Willard, and I was frustrated at not being able to help people in my church grow spiritually more. So I asked him, what do I need to do to help the people in my church grow more spiritually? And there was a long pause. And then he said, you must arrange your life so that you are experiencing deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God.
Could you say that again?
Well, I could. I actually have it written up and a sign over the door to my office when I go
beautiful.
every day. So arrange your days so that you are living in deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God. And my initial response was, no. I wasn't asking about me. I was asking about them. I want to know how to make them grow. And he said, I know what you were asking, but the reality is that we all reproduce ourselves. And if there is a gap between what I say and the way I live, the people closest to me will know the way that I live reveals what I most deeply believe. And they will then be influenced in that same direction. And so, again, it starts with, who am I becoming? And then this was just so striking to me. You must arrange your days so that you are living with deep contentment and joy and confidence in your experience of, in your daily life with God. You can't wait for the ministry to go better. You can't wait for growth or giving to be up and to the right, or for your sermons to be more exciting experiences, or for the elders to give you better feedback, or for whatever. The elders or the deacons or the governing board will not do this for you. Your boss will not do this for you. Your volunteers will not do this for you. Your staff will not do this for you. Your circumstances will never do this for you. You must arrange your life so that you are experiencing deep contentment and joy, and then confidence. You know, there's Paul's letter to the church at Corinth, 2 Corinthians, chapters 3 and 4 are so remarkable for those of us that are involved in pastoral ministry, where he starts out by saying, are we again commending ourselves? You know, am I doing self-promotion and image management? Do I need a letter of commendation? No, you yourselves are our letter. You show yourself to be a letter written by Christ to our ministry, not by ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, written not on tablets of stone, but in the human hearts. Such is our confidence in God. Not that we ourselves are competent to claim competence for ourselves. God has made. So that notion of this is not a matter of what the metrics look like. It's good to pay attention to that stuff. Feedback is important. Am I being effective? Am I gifted for the task that I'm doing? Those are all real important questions to ask. And when pastors or churches avoid them, that's not good. So lots of studies of effectiveness, spiritual giftedness, leadership. How do I preach more effectively? Those are all things that we ought to prize and pay attention to. But the foundation underneath them is, am I actually living with contentment and joy and confidence, even if it's in the midst of great pain, from one moment to the next? And although I forget that very often, Jason, even in these moments, as I say that with you and remember those words with him, it's just very clear. Yes, that is the good life. That is the treasure that comes in the jars of clay from one moment to the next, and that is possible in pastoral ministry. With all of the misbehavior and conflict and deceit that can give rise to cynicism, it is still possible always to arrange my life to experience contentment and joy and confidence. Others have done this far better than me, facing circumstances far worse than me. And this is my chance. This is my day.
Beautiful. Thank you. I personally grabbed hold of the words you said. It's possible.
Yeah.
I do believe it's possible, but I forget.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, like, we'll sometimes talk about the burnout rate of pastor, or pastors talk about integrity crisis. And I do think that the nature of our time is you're going to hear the stories of scandal. For every one pastor with a scandal, there's 1,000 good pastors, men and women serving their congregation, not perfectly, but without, the narrative begins to tell you that maybe I'll make it with integrity, but with joy, I don't know. And, but I grab hold of that. And I feel like that's maybe for those listening, we talked about the VIM model, vision, intentions, method. It's like the vision is contentment, joy, confidence with Christ in the midst of the circumstances of life and ministry.
No, and to come back to your statement, Jason, about maybe with integrity but joy, is such a important comment, because actually it is the deep presence of joy that makes a life of integrity sustainable.
Say more.
Dallas wrote in his book, Spirit of the Disciplines, how the failure to attain a satisfying life always makes temptation look good. When you think about somebody who ends up in scandal, could be around sex or could be around money, or there's other areas where pastors may sin hugely, but it doesn't look as scandalous, so they get away with it. Pride, greed, it's a miserable way of life. It is a miserable way of life. Nobody has ever attained a sustainably joyful life through sin. Now, folks have to listen to that and think about what do they think about it. But Jesus would certainly say that is the case. There's not another way in that direction. And if I'm able to live, that's why, like in Nehemiah, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And to the extent that I'm experiencing joy and gratitude and the presence of God in this moment, then sin just doesn't look good. Another statement of Dallas that I love and live with a lot is, one of the signs of spiritual maturity are the thoughts that no longer occur to you. So if I serve, empty the dishwasher and I'm not doing it much, it just feels like somebody should throw a parade. Nancy, give me a quick look. I cleaned up the kitchen. For Mother Teresa, that thought did not occur to her because she found joy in doing it. If somebody is struggling with alcohol, with an addiction, and they make it through a day without drinking, it feels monumental. And that thought just occurs to them over and over and over and over again. If somebody's not addicted to that, they're not thinking, what a good thing I didn't drink today. They are free to think better, happier, more noble thoughts. And so joy and contentment are that way. When I am miserable, when I am unhappy, then I begin to doubt that I can trust God with my well-being, and I feel like I have to take it on myself. I'm working so hard for this church. I'm trying so hard to preach. It's not growing. People don't like me. I deserve a little gratification from.
Mm.
And always, 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 if somebody ends up in a ditch, it doesn't happen at random. If you look, there was a lack of deep contentment, joy, and confidence in their life with God that made the ditch look good.
Hmm.
And in many ways, I think the saddest thing isn't the people who end up in a scandal. It's the people who live that life, but the scandal never becomes public.
Hmm.
And so their inner life is that life of misery and distance and discontent, and it leaks out all around them, but they just manage to retain outward respectability. So that thought about integrity and joy is so important. And to begin, just in a real honest way, saying, am I experiencing joy in my life?
Mm.
And if I'm not, how come? What's the barrier? And if it's that I've been waiting to become a success, then, all right, God, how do I go about working on that? And that's where finding a program where I engage in the practice of celebration on a regular basis.
Mm.
And it's really interesting. There's a guy who started mostly at Duke, but he's doing kind of the gold standard study of flourishing for clergy.
Hmm.
And the number one practice that distinguishes people who flourish in clergy versus people that don't make it, that don't sustain, end up in a ditch or something, number one is not an activity that I would have guessed at all. It's what he calls a restorative niche. It's actually a hobby, but he said people don't take the word hobby seriously. Do you engage in an activity that is so compelling to you that it makes you lose track of time?
Hmm.
And do you do that for at least 30 minutes once a week?
Hmm.
That's the number one activity that predictively separates people from flourishing clergy in clerical life and people that don't.
Wow.
And I think it gets to that notion of being able to attain a satisfying life and the need for appropriate levels of celebration, gratitude, whatever I need to do, solitude, fellowship with somebody that loves me, engaging in activities that produce a sense of aliveness. When my life is basically joyful, when I am experiencing in a non-cliche way the joy of the Lord,
Hmm.
That is our strength.
Hmm.
So just to ask myself the question, am I doing that? And if I'm not, how can I rearrange my life to do that and not wait until I am as successful as fill in the blank and then assume that I can be happy?
Hmm. There's so many things that I would love to chat with you about, but we're coming to time and I want to honor your time. We've referred to Steps. You didn't mention the book, but I'm currently reading your most recent book, Steps, which wades into some of the themes that we've been talking around, learning from AA. And just want to thank you for that work. It's been really life-giving for me. I just commend it to anyone. I think it's both good for me as a disciple, but it's really helping me think about my work as a disciple, like organizing our community of disciples as a church. It's been so helpful. And I'm trying to move slowly through it and let it affect my way of life, but also how I think. You use the language of theory of change. It's really helping me wrestle. What is my theory of change? And so thank you for that work. And then you also are sharing your work in a really compelling format through Become New, this daily drip of content. Can you just share a little bit about it? Because I think it's just a useful resource for people, and I'm grateful you're doing it. And so before we sign off, I just wanted to hear you share a little bit about the why and the what of Become New.
Yeah, that's another one where I backed into it. When I left the last church I worked at, it was a great place, but it was a very painful leaving. I had to leave. I was terminated there, and it's a very complicated and lots of pain attached to the problem. Didn't know if I would do this kind of thing anymore at all or not, but over time it became clear, yep, I should. And so I talked with lots and lots of folks that I knew well. And so I began by just spending hours a day kind of studying, thinking, reflecting, and then recording a video of spiritual teaching for spiritual growth, about 10 minutes long, and sending it out to 20 or 30 friends. And then it just kind of grew from there. So it's called Become New, from that statement of Dallas. The main thing God gets out of your life is the person that you become. We will post usually Monday through Friday. And it's aimed at helping people grow spiritually one day at a time. It's become a real precious thing to me, I think partly because I and the little team that I work with, we have all experienced a fair amount of pain in life. So the informal nickname for the folks who are part of that online community is the Fellowship of the Withered Hand. From that story where there's a guy in the synagogue and he's got a withered hand, and Jesus tells him to do the one thing you would never want to do in that setting, which is to expose brokenness, deformity, inadequacy. And it's the one thing he can't do, stretch out your hand. And yet when he does, then the power of God and the healing of God flows. And so we seek to be that kind of community, the Fellowship of the Withered Hand. And that's been a great gift of life. So, yep, if anybody wants to check it out, Become New, they could just Google my name and Become New and get there.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with me and those listening today. It's been a great gift. I'm thankful for my favorite book, by the way, is Soul Keeping. And sometimes a book is precious because of the right book at the right time.
Yeah.
And that was for me. You know, it gave a visual, a series of metaphors that helped me make sense of my heart's longing, and then some steps to follow. And so it's just thank you for your work. It's strengthened me personally. I'm sure that's the case with so many listening, and it means a lot that you spend time with us today.
Thank you, Jason, and to everybody, but especially to every pastor in Canada. Rich, rich blessings on your ministry and your work, and far, far deeper than that, your life.